Hi, everybody. Shannon Petrovich with Therapist Talks. If I can just get a quick thumbs up, then I know that you can hear me and see me and everything's good. Then we can go ahead and get started. Um, so, this is a question and answer and very casual. I also have other stuff to read or to talk about. So, you guys are the priority, but there have been other questions that have jumped in the last 3 weeks since my last one. So I will chime in with those when there's no questions coming in. So jump into the chat if you feel like telling me where you're from. That'd be cool. If one of you guys could give me just a quick thumbs up that you can see me and hear me, that would be great. Then I'll get going. Um, Anyway, happy holidays. I hope everybody's doing well. I know we're running up into Christmas and then the new year. And so I want to ask that, or just let you guys know that this will be the last one for this year. And then I will catch you again in January. So, as we get started, I do have some questions that have come in, but if you want to ask something, jump into the chat bar. That would be great. Um, and one of the things that came in was, could you please share your thoughts on whether it's healthy for an adult to always be triggered and go into a rage as a result? It's my daughter who grew up in a narcissistic family. I don't know how to talk to her anymore, as it seems like whatever we talk about makes her angry. For example, I can't even mention family and it gets her riled up. She's already had a few sessions of EMDR, but she isn't much different than before, maybe less depressed is all. So it's really important to recognize that, first of all, a few sessions of EMDR is not going to make any radical change for anyone. It takes time to get through past childhood trauma. And if she grew up in a narcissistic family, then she's got trauma. Um, but see, there's a difference between trauma and behavior. So when we talk about narcissists and people say, well, they probably had traumatic childhood, that may or may not be true, but that doesn't give anybody the right to be rude, raging, and abusive to anybody else. And that's what's really important, is to separate the trauma from the behavior. What you're seeing is behavior, and behavior requires boundaries. So if you think about those two needing to go together, if you see behavior, you need to establish boundaries. And we can always set boundaries. It doesn't matter if someone has had an abusive childhood, they still need boundaries. So I think a lot of times in our placating, peacekeeping, people pleasing mode, we think that boundaries are mean. And I've even heard people, a client come back and say, well, I set boundaries and she said I was being mean, or he said I was being mean. Well, boundaries aren't mean. Boundaries are how you protect yourself within that relationship. And boundaries are always important and always valid, and always, they're never mean. They're just how you're protecting yourself. So it's extremely important to recognize if there's behavior that you don't appreciate, that's disrespectful or raging or anything like that. Boundaries are the solution. Are boundaries going to always work? Well, yes and no. So the boundary works because it either corrects that behavior or it gives you the information you need to remove yourself. So a boundary always has to have some sort of teeth. In other words, when you rage at me, I'm going to hang up the phone, or I'm going to leave, and we can try again later. If it's your kid, you want to sort of give those short-term timeouts, and you want to keep trying, possibly. And so saying, we can try again later, we can talk about this later when you've calmed down. I'm not going to tolerate your abusive tone, and we can talk later. Now that person then has the two options. They can accept that and go, wow, I guess I was really being a jerk, and I need to stop that behavior because mom or dad is not going to put up with it any longer. Or they can escalate further and go, oh, no, you didn't just set a boundary with me. And they can really freak out on you and really, go to town on their abusive behavior. And then, you have to remove yourself for longer. So having a son or daughter who's a narcissistic behavior or traits, is a really challenging thing, and I'm getting a lot of questions about that in particular. So I think we're going to focus in on that for a little bit. And again, this is a Q&A, so please chime in on the chat box. I always prioritize the people who are here. Appreciate you being here. And so if you have a question or a topic, a general topic, that's fine too. Chime in on the chat box. And if somebody could just say hi so I know that the chat box is working, that would be super helpful. So no, it is not normal to fly into rage. And triggered or not triggered, again, it's we if we have childhood trauma, which most of us have some sort of small t or little t trauma, we can be triggered, and each of us deals with that differently. So a trigger is going to hit that little amygdala. We're going to feel that fight, flight, or freeze. And, if you feel the fight, then you're going to go, "Ooh, I want to rage at somebody." But you don't have to rage at somebody. That's a choice, right? And so I might feel anger by somebody's triggering me about something, but I get to choose whether I rage at somebody or drive down the road and hit somebody or whatever. Like, those are choices. So I don't care if she's triggered or not. I don't care who's triggered or not. It's not okay to rage at you about whatever trigger. And so don't sort of fall into that guilt trip, or that placating and peacekeeping, where you're basically giving her a pass, your daughter a pass, because she has a traumatic childhood. Don't give her that pass. Don't give anybody that pass. Nobody has the right to rage at you, no matter what their childhood, no matter what their history. Nobody has a right to be abusive to you. So setting boundaries is always important. Um, and we have to recognize that behavior is behavior. And again, the EMDR will have an impact, but if you don't set boundaries on the behavior, it won't matter, because the only thing that's going to change the behavior is boundaries. Okay? Behavior, boundaries. You need to tie those two things together. So another one, similar situation. Thank you so much. I've been dealing with, and again, jump into the chat box so I know it's working. Can someone just chime in and put hello or something so I know you can see the chat box and I can see the chat box and I don't have to fix it? Oh, shoot. Okay, so it kind of wasn't working. Thank you for live streaming about healing from narcissism. Oh, thank you. Okay, chat is working. I wasn't seeing it. Have you ever seen a change in a narcissistic parent's behavior after the death of a scapegoat child? Oh, interesting. Um, so, so what's true in families is that the roles jump around. And so so for instance, when one child leaves the family, even if it's to go off to college, so a normal healthy leaving, the other kids are affected and they can jump into different roles. So if we think about the different roles in the family, oftentimes there's sort of that scapegoat child, that golden child. So the golden child being that one that sort of does everything perfectly and kind of gets all that positive attention, and the scapegoat being the one that kind of is always in trouble and gathers that negative attention. And so it isn't like a conscious thing. Nobody's trying to be the golden child or the scapegoat child, but it usually kind of lines out that way. And so when the scapegoat child leaves the family, there then oftentimes a different kid kind of gets drawn into that. And the level of rigidity of roles is absolutely equivalent to the level of dysfunction in the family. In other words, if the parental dysfunction is really extreme, the rigidity in the roles is really extreme. If parental dysfunction is pretty mild to moderate, the rigidity of the roles is very mild. Okay. So if you think about that, if you have a really severely dysfunctional family, they need a scapegoat child. They need a golden child, and they need probably a scapegoat child even more than they need a golden child. And so when a scapegoat leaves the family for whatever reason, they actually can you can see an increase in the dysfunction because they're not able to triangulate that kid. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. And when a golden child leaves the family, is a hole as well, and you might see the family kind of blow apart. So there's a lot of interesting things that happen when that goes on. Seems narcissism is very prevalent in today's youth. I would absolutely agree. I think a part of it is that our culture is very narcissistic. There is a lot of focus on superficiality, on wanting what you want and getting it and going after it. There's a lot of focus on getting revenge or getting over on or back at someone, which is also narcissistic traits. So there's a ton of support and sort of bolstering up all those negative qualities that we think of as narcissistic traits. So it's really important that we recognize that our young people are subject to that their entire lives. They're attached to their phones and their social media and all those pretty negative things. I mean, we can use it for good, obviously. I'm here trying to use it for good. But when you think about a lot of the pressures that they go through in middle school and high school, especially, it can be really terrible. They may have grown up in a narcissistic parenting situation where they watched one person be the victim and one person be the abuser. And, half the time a kid will line up with the abuser, and the other half they will line up with the placater, peacekeeper. And so, those kids from those families are at risk. Um, let's see. I have 2 deaths and the narcs vulnerable had no reaction. Okay, so, I've seen 2 deaths and the 3 narcs vulnerable had no reaction. Not totally sure what that means. So someone with narcissistic traits obviously has very, very low empathy. That's one of the most concerning things, and the lower the empathy, the more severe is that narcissist. So when you look at someone in the severe range of narcissism, they have almost no empathy for others and no compassion and no feeling that other people have feelings or deserve to have their feelings be heard and supported and listened to, and all of that are validated. So it's extremely important to recognize the level of poor empathy. And there's even some studies now that people are either born kind of more empathically or less empathically. And so when you take a kid who's born sort of less empathically and less is kind of wired that way, and then you put them in a home where he or she sees narcissistic behaviors, you have more of a setup for that kind of disaster. How do you fix a broken picker when your parents have been narcissists? Great question. So the choosing poorly, it's kind of a familiarity and an I can deal with this kind of a thing. It's not conscious. Again, nobody chooses to be with a narcissist, so we don't want to blame the victim. But what we do end up choosing is somebody who kind of feels like home. And so it's some people say, "Oh, that's just comfortable." Ah, that pisses me off because it's not comfortable. Nobody is comfortable being treated that way. But what is true is that if you grew up in that kind of family and you watch that kind of dynamic and you love those people because you can't help but love your parents no matter what's going on, then you tend to resonate with and accept to some degree that kind of behavior in others. You also kind of know that you have the skills and ability to placate, peace keep, and people please, and that you can sort of handle that as, for want of a better term. And so you tend to resonate with those people who maybe have little anger fits all the time, and you tend to feel like I can do that. I can make that person happy, and again, it's not a conscious thing and it's not a happy, comfortable thing. It's just that your picker is broken. And so one of the things that you can do is do that internal work. So in other words, you're still talking to yourself the way you used to in your head as a kid, probably. And you may have things that go on in your head like, oh, I'm no good, or oh, I'm nobody's ever going to love me or I'm not worthy. Those kinds of things, you've got to fix that inside stuff. You've got to do that internal work. When you do that internal work and you start to clean those things up, then you're more capable of dropping the 3 Ps. And what I mean by that is you've got to stop people pleasing, placating, and peacekeeping. So, in an early relationship, when you are pouring on all the 3 Ps, you're setting up a dynamic where you don't matter. Okay. So, it isn't just that your picker is broken, it's that our early relationship signals are not good. And so we're kind of teaching that person to treat us however they want to. And we are going to pick up the pieces. We're going to placate and peacekeep. We're going to pour on that people pleasing to make them happy. So we're setting up this dynamic where we don't matter. Our thoughts, feelings, wants, needs, boundaries, none of it matters because only they matter. So that's a big part of what happens that sets in that dynamic. So, because I mean, we meet people all the time that might have those narcissistic traits, and I can see the dividing line when I started to heal and I started to choose differently. And even today, if I meet somebody with narcissistic traits, I know that the way they interact with me and the way I interact back is so different. And they're not going to like me. And they're not going to want to be in friendship or relationship with me if I was, like I'm happily married, so this is not a thing. But if I were single and I was interacting with somebody like that, I would treat them so differently because I would be treating me so differently. I would have boundaries. I would tell them what I thought, felt, wanted, needed, and they wouldn't want anything further to do with me, right? So it's extremely important you recognize you do the inside work and then you do the outside work, which is stopping the 3 Ps, telling the truth, being in your truth, being in your authenticity, and not taking any garbage from anybody. That is what makes the difference. And so it isn't just the picker, but it really is the picker plus what happens after that in that early relationship stuff. So people will talk about how we're kind of in that honeymoon period. Well, don't do honeymoon period. Period. You have to come to that relationship with your whole self. It doesn't mean you're a bitch. It means that you are just authentic. And if somebody doesn't respect that in the early stages, holy crap, right? That's when everybody's on their best behavior. So if they can't handle you in in those early stages, then good riddance to bad garbage, man. You do not want to start off a relationship in that placating, peacekeeping mode. Okay. All right. So again, keep jumping in on this chat and hopefully it continues to work. I know it's working. Hopefully I continue to see it. I've been dealing with my daughter's abuse for years. It hurts me to the core because I love her, but I can never do anything right. She calls me wicked names, is always fighting, and turns everything around like it's my fault and I'm crazy or I'm toxic. That's her favorite word. My husband wants me to have no contact with her. I'm not ready for that, but I do set limits when she's rude and disrespectful. I said goodbye and shut off my phone for a few days. Good. It's just the worst having a daughter like this. I've spent too many nights crying over her. It's time to take action. So, absolutely true. And the action that you need to take is always boundaries. Again, coming back to that. And you did set boundaries, which is very cool. You shut off your phone for a few days and said goodbye and shut off the phone for a few days. Perfect. Um, and that's really what you want to do. And when you can give those, I call them grown up timeouts. So you've given her like little timeouts and then you give her a bigger timeout with a few days. You might even give her a month long timeout if she's really awful, or just a bunch of 3-day timeouts every time she does it. Pretty soon she will either decide that she wants to stay in relationship and therefore she has to change her behavior, or she'll keep escalating and then you can't keep working at it this way. But, a lot of times people want us to go no contact. Sometimes that's not necessary. Sometimes it's fixable if you keep doing these consistent grown-up timeouts with the boundaries. Another one, no more love bombing. I have nothing to say, I promise. Now that I know what I know, until he gets some help. And so this is a son. I do not want to do that mother thing anymore. I refuse to allow anybody, including family, to hurt or abuse me. Right on. They're constantly chasing love. As we all know, love starts inside us, not outside. Until he can love himself enough to get some help, I will stay estranged. When I started setting boundaries, he went no contact. Now I'm no contact. Those boundaries are set and will not be moved until he gets some help. I don't call or text. I just live my life, enjoy it. Your children will kill you. Not doing it makes no sense. Well, good work. This is really hard, and there's no sugarcoating it. It is painful. And, if you're going through this, you're probably grieving. And it's really important to take care of yourself in your grief, because grief is awful. And especially losing a child this way, if you actually go no contact and have no contact, it's brutal. And people even lose their grandchildren this way. But try to do the grown-up timeouts, try to do the boundaries, try to make them short, so that son or daughter can have the opportunity to try to grow, um, and see what happens, because you may or may not have to go no contact for good. Please share your thoughts. Oops, been there. Okay, let's see. Please jump in on the chat box. Again, this is a live stream Q&A, but if you don't have anything to say, I will jump in. As narcissists age, they just become a pain in a new way to the people still stuck with them. So yes, a lot of times narcissists, as they age, get worse, and sometimes they get better. It's really weird, and there is no rhyme or reason, but if they feel like they can behave that badly, they will continue to. But again, boundaries will sometimes make that behavior better, because one thing that's true, sometimes um, they're really needing you in a different way. And so if you hang up and go on your merry way, or if you leave the house and they really needed you to go shopping for them, then you have a little more teeth in your boundaries. And then when they call you and say, hey, I really need this, this, and this, it'd be the time to say, well, mom or dad, I am not going to put up with the abuse any longer. And so I need you to understand that when you are talking to me that way or raging at me that way, I'm going to leave. If I haven't done your shopping, I haven't done your shopping. So you are going to have to change your behavior around me. Again, jump in on, sorry, probably Amazon. My dogs are going crazy. Um, strange things strange things happen when you're born in such families. We doubt ourselves. We can't express ourselves to others. Narcissistic people do everything on purpose and then act innocent. Um, and so, very important information and thoughts around this one. That when you're born in families, you can doubt yourself, and yet you can't express yourself to others. It's really, really hard when you grow up with watching that kind of thing all the time. It's I mean, the gaslighting alone makes you feel kind of crazy. And then, how does that work when you try to support yourself? It's really, really, really difficult. So recognizing that is something that you need to do. I apologize for my crazy dogs. um, that narcissistic people do everything on purpose and then act innocent. So this can be true and it can be subconscious. I think they manipulate and control compulsively. And if they are oftentimes aware of that, and then they oftentimes are not aware of that. Sometimes they just feel like this is normal and this is what they do and this is who they are. So it's really not necessarily true that they are always doing things on purpose and but they certainly act innocent after the fact. Not a question about that. Observation. The more I learn about different presentations of narcissism, I've realized nearly every person in my world is narcissistic. So I think that everybody, we all have self-centered traits. It's just it's just who we are. And so I think self-centeredness is certainly a trait of narcissism, and it's also a trait we all carry. But I don't think that every person in your world should be narcissistic, although I don't know your world, and so maybe there are that many people. And certainly I do, yeah, I have to say it is true that today and maybe even in certain circles and certain age groups that it's even more true. So if that's really true in your world, I would want you to find new people. Does that make sense? So I don't know how to do that necessarily, not knowing anything about your world, but I do think that sometimes we tend to hang in the wrong circles, and maybe it's just habitual and or it comes from high school or college or what have you, or a work zone. And sometimes we need to stretch ourselves. So, finding volunteer work, finding a cause that you're passionate about, and volunteering with it, doing something different. Maybe jumping into music or jumping into some other aspect of something that you like. And I know in where I live, there's literally a club for everything. So if you're into bicycling, there's a bicycling club. If you're into mountain biking or hiking or running or even quilting or crafts or anything, there's literally a club for that. So and singing and music. So if you have an interest, or even if you think you might have an interest, jump into something new and see if you can't find new people, because that would be terrible. And then, uh, yeah, it would be terrible to feel like everybody in your world is like that. So here's a sort of a number. Aren't narcissists created by their parents? This is one of my pet peeves, that people are always blaming the parents. It's Yes, there are some aspects of parenting. Being overindulgent can certainly lead or add to narcissistic traits. Not having boundaries with your kids certainly adds to narcissistic traits. But these folks typically, especially the more serious and severe, tend to be kind of wired that way from birth to some degree. And then what we do after that adds to it. But, a lot of times parents are, there's a parenting team. And if you're one of that parenting team and you're the placating, peacekeeping person, and the other one is the narcissist, then yes, that your kids have seen a dynamic that's unhealthy, and they may choose to be the narcissist in that dynamic. And that is oftentimes where I hear from clients that they have a child who's narcissistic. It's just that they have kind of chosen that controller manipulator role instead of the victim role. Um, let's see. I have many old journals and I don't know what to do with them. Is it now stale energy that drags me down and needs to be eliminated? I wonder if it would be a good idea to reread them, adding comments from my more mature self, where there is lots of self compassion, and then throw them away. That's a great question, because I am in my book, that most of you know about. If you don't know about my book, jump into nofoggydays.com. I posted it at the very top of the chat, and you will see the link to my book. So my book is Out of the Fog into the Clear: Journaling to Help You Heal from Toxic Relationships. And that's toxic relationships of all types. And so I really do encourage journaling. I think it's wonderful. It helps you to decipher the rational part of your mind and the rational thoughts about this relationship from the emotional. And that is what gives you the ability to make a rational decision, not an emotional one, and move through the process of getting out. So journaling is wonderful. Reading old journals is fraught with positives and negatives. So the positives would be that you can see how far you've come. You can read what's gone on in your life over the past whatever years. You can notice, oh my gosh, I was so hard on myself and I'm not quite as bad as that now. That's great. Or you can notice, oh my gosh, I keep doing the same thing over and over, and that sucks, and I've gotta stop doing that. Certainly, when I've read journals way in the past, that was part of what happened, and it wasn't fun. So I think that you have to do it mindfully. You also don't wanna get sucked into your history too much, especially if you don't have a therapist on board. But if we focus too much on the past, we tend to sort of get swallowed by it. And even in working with clients, I don't focus all the time on the past. Back in the 80s, I think a lot of therapy did that, and I think it made people more depressed, honestly. So it's really important not to wallow in the past, not to get too focused in the past, and to notice if you are getting depressed by whatever you're doing with your journals. But I love the idea of rereading them and adding comments from your more mature, compassionate self, and then throw them away, if you want to throw them away. So, adding comments from your compassionate self is beautiful because if you now know that, wow, and part of what I love to do when I do help a person go through back into the past is to say, wow, I survived that. Wow, that took a lot of guts and a lot of determination to walk that through. And I'm a survivor, I'm not a victim. So if you can see it that way, beautiful. And if you need to throw them away after that, great. Or if you want to keep them and do it again later, great. Just notice. What is it doing to you? Is it making you happy? Is it making you more depressed? And how are you reframing it internally so that you are supporting yourself, you're being compassionate with yourself, and you're not degrading yourself further by reading them? Doesn't our past help a therapist and ourselves understand why we made the choices we made? Absolutely. I didn't say I don't go in the past. I said I don't dwell too far. I don't dwell too much in the past. What I mean by that is we're definitely going to go there. We're definitely going to find out why you talk to yourself the way you talk to yourself, why you have those stories that you tell yourself. And we're going to unpack and unravel those. Even in my book, I encourage people to unravel where those stories came from, where those harsh critic voices came from. We definitely have to look at that. But we don't want to wallow in it. We don't want to stay there. Even at the end of every session, I'm not going to stay in the past. I'm going to bring that person full circle up to the present and talk about how to integrate that learning and that information into here and now and today so that you can move forward so that you're not staring at the rearview mirror of your life all the time and falling into the abyss. You've got your windshield is big, your rearview mirror is this big. So you definitely need to look at your rear view or you don't know what's going on inside of you and outside of you. But then you have to refocus on the windshield. Does that make sense? I just lost my only friend, and he was my advocate, and he abandoned because he was sexually inappropriate with me, and I was not having that. Now I'm getting terrible spasms in my stomach. Please help. That is tragic and a terrible way to lose someone. So the abandonment is real and grief is real. Again, there's always I I think it's really important to get with people and to be around whoever else you have in your life. Um, if if he was your only friend and advocate, you need to maybe reach out to the hotlines and warm lines and 988, which is now the 911 for mental health emergencies. So, and it's very real that we get physiological responses to emotional pain. But taking care of yourself compassionately, trying to get around other people who are compassionate, and if you need to, calling those hotlines and warm lines and taking care of yourself. Like childhood relationships with our parents. In retrospect, I understand my codependency. Yeah, so I think that the childhood relationships with your parents are a big part of why we talk to ourselves inside our heads the way we do. So, whatever messages we got from them, and they don't have to be necessarily direct one on one. My parents said, "You are a worthless person," or "You are unlovable," or "You are stupid or ugly." Um, so the things that we say inside our head may not have direct correlation to the person who said it, who gave us that message, if that makes sense. And so it could be that there was chaos going on between mom and dad, and we internalized it as, "I'm not worth anybody's attention, and I just have to suck it up and deal with my own emotions because nobody else cares about my emotions. My emotions don't matter." So it's kind of a the how we interpret the things that happen to us. Then we add on school, we add on our culture, we add on all the rest of it, and so feeling unworthy, unlovable, ugly, stupid, all that stuff can have to do with multiple avenues of negative messaging that we story in our heads in our own unique way. So it's really important that you recognize I storied this in my own unique way, and it was partially due to all the stuff that was going on around me. And I can change that story anytime. It's extremely important to recognize that story is optional. It is not required for me to carry that the rest of my life. And I storied that when I was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. That's what's remarkable. We create these stories when we are so young, and we internalize, introject other people's messages into ourselves and carry those with us for the rest of our lives. But we have to recognize that's a 4-year-old's perspective or a 5-year-old's perspective on what's going on. It's not my adult perspective. My adult perspective can look at that and say, well, that wasn't my fault. And I wasn't a terrible child. I was just a regular kid who, was fun sometimes and sometimes a holy terror. I don't know. But it doesn't mean those negative messages are true. It means that I storied that when I was so little that I have to take it out now and look at it and say, wow, that's not true any longer. So it's really important to recognize that and then say what is true about me. And when I look at what is true about me, then I can superimpose that over those old stories and I can be self compassionate and I can be self caring and I can do all that stuff that is crucial to take care of myself on a daily basis. All right. Hi from Scotland. Hi, Hetty. The hotlines are terrible. They don't help anymore at all. Oh, I'm sorry. Here they reroute it to the local crisis line who only knows how to see if someone needs to be 5150. There's no crisis line. You can't go to the store and buy good people. Please give me something I can use. Um, uh, yes, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that in your area, the crisis lines are not helpful. Ours are really helpful in our area, and people will show up for you. Um, it's a terrible thing, but I would still encourage you to call there and get that help. The warm line and the crisis line and the 988 numbers. And I think that they should also have a listing of supports in your area. There's also a lot of 12-step programs that are helpful. Emotions Anonymous, DB, um, uh, you'll have to kind of look it up, but there are those supports in AA, NA, and Emotions Anonymous for people who just need a support system right here, right now. Anyway, please reach out to those things anyway. So other questions jump in. It does take courage to not placate, people please, and patronize, um, um, placate, people please, and peace keep. The please don't leave me without telling me to get around people which I don't have, and San Francisco suicide prevention. Um, I've stepped away from most relationships with the explanation that I'm in spiritual seclusion. I've wasted too much time for nothing of any real value. Getting around other people is really hard, Rain Spirit. I I'm just fully aware that I can't fix that right here, right now in this setting, and that's why I'm encouraging you to call the hotlines, even though they may or may not. I honestly have known so many therapists who got their start on the hotlines, and so even if you've run into a few people who are not caring, you will run into one who is, eventually, and you just have to keep getting around those people. But longer term, I think it's important to recognize that we all have programs in our area that we can. Um, okay. That we can get with, we can volunteer places to find new people, to find people who are probably typically also empathic. And so those are really important connections to make. So when people are coming out of abusive relationships, narcissistic relationships, I always encourage them to find something that you're passionate about and volunteer, because it's really a place to meet other like-minded, empathic, caring people. So it's really important to do that kind of thing, and care about yourself by caring about others. Is it the solution completely? Of course not. But I think it's an important part of self-care that you have to get connected with others, and that can be a way to connect with others. And like I'm saying, that's not in a crisis time. That's in a longer term, how to rebuild your network kind of a way. And like I said, Emotions Anonymous can be a really good help and support as well. Um, some of these narcissists, so this was in response to people pleasing and placating. Some of the narcissists are physically abusive, so keeping them happy is a good idea. And sometimes family will take them to you when you leave the abuse. Things are not always simple. So, absolutely, this is really an important part of it, that when you know that your people pleasing and placating is something that's undermining yourself, that is not to say that you never ever use it again. It is something that you have in your back pocket. If you need to people please and placate until you're able to get out, you know that you can do those things. And you also know that that makes you feel sick and it makes you feel undermined. And it isn't something you want to do on a long term basis. But if it's something you need to do short term while you get the strategies in line or the plan in line to get out and get away from that person, absolutely, you need to use those 3 Ps, judiciously and intentionally, in order to placate them until you can be safe and get out. So I think that's absolutely an important thing. Um, in terms of any kind of stomach ailment, I'll speak to that, Rain Spirit. If if you look at the trauma responses that all of us have and all animals have, if you think about even they've done lots of studies of the gazelles on the African plain, and when a lion goes after a gazelle and takes her down and is almost about to eat her, so she's gone into flight mode. And then she might even fight when the lion grabs her with kicking and that sort of thing and thrashing. And then she goes into a shutdown, a freeze mode, which is just a complete just freeze. And then if that happens, if it's interrupted, then that will spur a releasing of, of all of that adrenaline. And then they'll get up and they'll shake violently and then they'll run off. And oftentimes they'll evacuate their bowels on the way. And so the physiological response of that triggering event is all encompassing. It's complete. So it's extremely important to recognize that all of those physiological reactions are part of the body's central nervous system reaction to stress and reaction to trauma. And all of those kinds of things benefit from any kind of self relaxation and, taking a warm bath and a warm water bottle or things like that on your stomach. But it also is true that we can have our bodies respond so aggressively that we can get a real physiological problem out of it. There's a thing called broken heart syndrome, and where somebody would actually die of a broken heart after a really traumatic event of a heart attack. So I don't want to minimize what you're going through, and if you need to go to the ER for that, I think it would be important. Um, so it's really important to recognize all these things and to notice what's going on and what's important and how to take good care of yourself in terms of self-compassion, self-care, all of those kinds of things that are essential. Um, di- it's very depressed, even though it's very beautiful environmentally. So, any other questions as we start to wrap up? And I know I have a few more, but I don't want to take up the rest of our time. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about is how everybody is going into the holiday season. And what's really, really challenging, I think, is that for a lot of people, holiday season is not festive, it's not fun, it's not happy, it's not joyful. So if you are a person who struggles with the holidays, it's extremely important that you recognize that that is not true for you. I think a lot of churches do what they call Blue Christmas, which is for people who are not happy about the holidays to have a special service that is not all happy, happy, joy, joy, but is really acknowledging and recognizing their pain in the holiday season, whether it's because you're missing somebody or because you've been struggling with something this year or because you don't feel safe around the holidays or people drink more and are more crazy in their behavior around the holidays or you just feel a tremendous amount of stress and trying to be perfect. It's really important. Don't try to be perfect. Don't try to put too much into things that you can't control. Don't try to overdo, overdo, overdo. It would be better for you to be present than to buy a lot of presents. And I really believe that. And I really want everybody to practice self compassion and self care and doing things for yourself and with others if you have others that you want to engage with, but recognizing even if it's just you that you can take care of you and do nice things for yourself as best you can and not get caught up in the holiday stuff. um, I'm going to find volunteer opportunities. Yeah, and I think that that can be really, really important is just having that sense of I'm going to try to be there for somebody else this holiday season just to take some of the stress out of that and just to be present with yourself and present with someone else. Even though, I'm not saying that we want to just put it our codependent selves into overdrive. We do need to do that good self-care in order to um, not be completely depleted and bankrupted emotionally and physically at the end of the holiday season. All right. I think it's incredibly, it's been a little bit of a challenging live stream. And I want to just ask if anybody else has anything else they want to share before we wrap up. Um, and I want to let you know that we will be live streaming again, probably the second week in January. So take really, really good care of yourselves, everybody. I really, really appreciate you showing up, and I will talk to you again in the new year. Bye bye.